extravaganza. This is going to be our last class of the week. We have wrapped up 25 classes, all focused around sugar and chocolate, and really just getting people excited in the kitchen. And so we're going to really end on a delicious sweet note today, and I am so excited to introduce you guys to our newest chef here at the Gigi Kitchen. This is Chef Brendan Price, and I actually fell in love with Brendan before I even knew who he was. Because if you have ever eaten his bread or any of the things that he's created, you just instantly are like, I need to know who is making this. And I was introduced to him through his bread at Oak. And it's a restaurant in Draper. He's no longer there, but he has left his mark in several places around the state. And just, I think you'd be surprised. And I hope he'll tell them a little bit about where. He'll tell the story better than I will. But I think we'll be surprised at how many great chefs kind of have their hands and so many things here. And we're so grateful for that, because our goal here is to get Utah to not be the green jello or casserole state anymore. And so Brandon is definitely getting us to that place, and we're so excited to have him. But we had to find a way to incorporate some chocolate or some sweetness, because his pizza class is fantastic, and I would feel really great about doing that, but it's the chocolate extravaganza. So he was like, oh, I know exactly what we're going to do. His wife, and he lived in Brazil for a while, so we're doing Brigadeiro pizza, and it's going to be so fun to be able to incorporate that. You're going to be able to take this crust and these concepts and use them in your Friday night pizza nights, which we hope you guys will all start incorporating. He was just saying, what did your wife say last night?
9 weeks in a row.
She's like, pizza again? And
she's over it.
So she's over, but then the girls were all like, wait, where's our pizza? So this is definitely a fun family thing that we can all incorporate together and just find a way to cook for our families where we're all enjoying it. So we're really excited to have Brandon here sharing his secret. We hope you guys just take in all of his goodness, but just the amount of knowledge that he has regarding flour and gluten and ingredients is just so inspiring, because once we understand those things, it makes creating in the kitchen so much easier and just a way to be able to create and do things on your own. So I hope you guys feel inspired today. Thank you so much for joining us. And Brandon, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. So I've been in the industry now, I guess it's been about 15 years. I started when I was fresh back from an LDS mission, and I started working at the Lion House Pantry. If anybody's ever been there before, it's pretty classic around town. I wouldn't suggest that it's like the culinary mecca of Utah in general, but it is.
You gotta start there, right?
You gotta start somewhere, right? And so through the years, I've gained knowledge from different people. I worked with a really amazing pastry chef, actually in Fresno, California. His name was Massimo Ciccarello, and he gave me a lot of a base of what I consider my knowledge has to do with gluten and flour. He kind of taught me focaccia and a few pastries that way, and that's kind of like built upon it. But between working in Salt Lake and California, so I helped start Blue Lemon here locally. I worked with Chef Todd Leonard, and so it was a great experience. That was kind of like where I cut my teeth in restaurant management. I was there for a while. I actually helped found Even Steven Sandwiches as well. I was their corporate chef for 3.5 years. Right now I'm a part owner in Oakwood Fire Kitchen in Draper and Dirty Bird Fried Chicken in Provo. So I've got my hands in like basically every type of cuisine you could possibly imagine. But where my passion always leads me is pizza and pasta. And so that's what I want to share with you guys today. Have you guys ever had brigadeiros before? Oh, so have you ever made brigadeiros before? All right, so you guys can, definitely tell me as I'm doing things wrong, because I am not Brazilian. I don't claim to be Brazilian. I lived there for 2 years on an LDS mission. I came back, and 2 weeks later met my wife at a dance club in Salt Lake. She was a beautiful Brazilian. I still had, all those thoughts of wanting to go back to Brazil and experience it, and ended up meeting her, and we fell in love and got married 6 months later. So now we've been married 14 years, and we go back to Brazil quite often. I think I've been back 18 times maybe. So we go back often, and we try to experience as much as we can of the culture and things there. So does anybody know the story of the Brigadeiro?
The general.
So the general, yes. So in 1945, there was this guy who was running for president. He was a brigadier general. His name was Eduardo Gomez. And so no one knows exactly where brigadeiros, the actual pastry comes from, the actual sweet comes from. They just know that in 1945, they use it to promote this guy because he was a very good-looking gentleman, and they thought that he could just win by his good looks, and he couldn't, so they decided to go another campaign and do sweets right at the voting booth. I don't think that he won, but everybody loved this sweetness, and so they continued to make it. So it's part of the comida pobre, which is like the poor part of Brazil, like their real like foundation cuisine. And so this would be traditionally made into little balls, which you guys will get to try afterwards. And there's another way that you can, which doesn't seem as sanitary post-COVID, but you would just put the pot directly in the middle of the table, you would put sprinkles on top of it, and you would scoop it out with a spoon. And so Brigadeiro chocolate. So that's what kind of inspired, I think, a lot of the sweet pizzas in Brazil, because sweet pizzas in Brazil, I don't know why, but you cannot order pizza in Brazil without getting a sweet pizza. Everything from Nutella and bananas to chocolate and strawberries, and the most famous is this Brigadeiro. So they make it different sometimes, but I kind of want to show you how to make the Brigadeiro first, and we're going to start making pizza dough, which is kind of a bonus for this whole thing, right? And then we're going to make the pizzas and build it all together. Any questions before we get started? All right. So, sweetened condensed milk. I think that a lot of people, at least I, when I was growing up, had no idea how delicious it was. And so you see it and you're like, oh, it's just sweetened condensed milk, it's not a big deal. And so I think we mix it up with evaporated milk in our minds, and it's not very delicious, right? And then when I lived in Brazil, it's in everything. It's on everything. It's around everything. I think the thing that I ate most when I was there for breakfast is banana with sweetened condensed milk and cinnamon on top, which sounds like a horrible thing to eat for breakfast. But that was like a mainstay. So one thing that we learned the hard way is that you should combine these while they're cold. So if you get the sweetened condensed milk into the pot while it's cold, or room temperature, I should say, it'll be a little bit easier to incorporate the chocolate. So traditionally this would be served, or this would be made with Nescau, which is like the Brazilian version of Nesquik, but we couldn't bring ourselves to make it traditionally because it is too sweet in my mind. So the way that it's not chocolate enough, exactly. So we use this extra brew cocoa powder. You can get it here at Orson DD's. It has a ton of flavor, more chocolate, and since this is chocolate, we were trying to incorporate real chocolate, not fake stuff that is, mass produced, right? So if you just incorporate this while it's still at room temperature, it'll have a little bit easier of a way to kind of get everything there without a ton of lumps, right? And feel free at this point, whatever you have at home will be fantastic. You don't need to go out of your way. The idea of this dessert is to use things that you already have at home. And that's why that Nesquik was the one that's used most traditionally, because that's what every Brazilian drinks in the morning, and that's what everyone has. So, but as you want to incorporate things and make things fancier, it's great to then use things that you've also incorporated in your fancy desserts into this style of cuisine, in my opinion. So if you just whisk it while it's cold, until you just incorporate all of the cocoa powder. And if you've done this at home, whenever you try and add cocoa powder to hot milk, it never works, right? But if you had just a little tiny bit of milk with cocoa powder cold, mix it and then add it into the warmer thing, you're able to get that without lumps, right? Another thing that I've added to this recipe is butter. I think everybody can agree that butter is delicious and that almost nowhere is it unwelcome, right? And what that butter also does is makes it kind of a softer texture for our pizza specifically, but it also makes it easier to roll out when you're rolling out the balls. It does make it a little bit softer texture, but I feel like that's better for the overall mouthfeel afterwards, right? So we're just gonna get that warming up just a little bit, and you can kind of see, maybe, that it's smooth. You don't have any of those lumps. You've got those out of it, and now you can start to reduce it. And as you're just reducing it, what you're looking to do is take it back just a bit, right? You want to make everything hot. You want to get some of the liquid out of it, and that'll make it so it's a more solid thing, right? So we also have the addition of high quality vanilla, right? And with those items, that's when I think you take your Brigadeiro just up a notch from what it originally is intended to be, right? Questions until now?
Did you add the butter into that as well?
Just now, yep. Butter and vanilla. And so what you're looking for is just to kind of get back to the original texture of what the sweetened condensed milk is straight out of the can. And when you're back to that texture, when you've incorporated all these other things, you'll get that nice texture as it cools and you're able to turn it into balls. Okay?
So is the butter already melted, or?
No, it's just room temperature. So now it's going to melt in to incorporate. It already smells delicious. Okay, so the next, while we're kind of working on all this, is the pizza dough. So have any of you made pizza dough at home before? So pizza dough is fantastic. I think that there's some techniques that you'll learn in here that kind of cheat the system of what most people think you can accomplish in your home oven, okay? So a big one is if you're making pizza tradition or in a restaurant scene, you have a way hotter oven, right? Most deck ovens get to 650. Most wood-fired ovens get up to 1,000 degrees, right? So at Oak Wood Fire Kitchen, where I'm part owner, we always get it up to around 900, 870 to cook the pizzas properly. And if you get it less than that, you just don't get the right caramelization and puffiness that you can get in a really hot oven. So does anybody know what's the hottest your oven will go at home? 500, 550. If you have a really nice oven that you've like Jamie rigged, you can probably get it to 600, right? And if you know where the thermostat is, you can actually put a thing of ice underneath where the thermostat little probe is, and you can get it a lot hotter. I'm not suggesting that. Orson Gaming will not refund the oven that you destroyed. But those are options that you can
I
do,
have the
right?
Blackstone and it gets really hot.
So the Blackstone. Oh, okay. They have an oven?
No, it's a pizza oven. It's like a barbecue.
You add it onto the
No, I just do it
grill.
outside on the patio, but it gets up to 800 to 900.
Wow.
Cooks the pizza in like 2 minutes.
That's awesome. So I have a uni. So if anybody's seen the unis, they're super cheap. They're awesome. They're fantastic. So this dough will help a lot with that. But what we've kind of done to change the oven is there's not as much of a temperature regulator on the broiler of your oven. So if you preheat your oven and then switch to broil before you're about to make it, or while you're preheating, what that does is get it even hotter. And the reason why Neapolitan style pizza is so famous and delicious is because the flame that kind of licks the top of the dome, that's what actually cooks the pizza and broils it and makes it so it puffs quicker. So it's more important for you to have a flame over the top of it when you're cooking professionally than it is to have the oven hotter, right? So with that said, you can kind of mimic that by using the broiler in your oven. Now, the only downside is because it's so hot and it cooks very quickly, you'll burn pizzas. How many pizzas do we burn? I feel like we burnt like 3 or 4 pizzas at least throughout the classes. So just know that like you can't set it and forget it. Like that's a set it, look at it 36 seconds later, look at it 30 seconds after that, and then maybe it's done after that. So you can't go too far. So this is kind of what you're looking for. I'll try and get this in the camera view. So it's starting to kind of caramelize on the sides. It's starting to get thicker. So this is what you want to kind of stop with and let it kind of chill out. And then that's why we're going to make the pizza crust in the meantime. So this is made. What's that?
Did it boil?
Yeah, it came up to like a simmer.
Oh, okay.
So you don't have to like get it boiling, rolling, boil it all. Especially because we're not going to roll this into balls. We're going to put this on top of a pizza. So you want that softer texture.
So it's not like the standard Brigadeiro where you look for that.
You're looking to like pull away from the side. And even then, you don't have to go as far. I think a lot of people like go further and further and get it darker and darker and then more dense. And I just prefer when it's like lighter and easier to bite through. And so you'll see the ones that we've made. They're actually in those little like mini cupcake things and they've kind of spread out a little bit because I feel like it's easier to eat and it's tastier that way. But feel free, yes, you go ahead.
So you leave it room temperature to solidify, or
Yep, just room temperature. You could, if you were trying to roll into balls, I would suggest put it in the fridge overnight. Put it in the fridge overnight. That'll like solidify everything, make it easier to roll into those balls. But this we wouldn't. We're just gonna let that at room temperature, and that's what we're gonna use as a sauce for our pizza. Okay. So this is 00 flour. Does anybody know what 00 flour is? So that is, so it's doppio zero in Italian, And so the way that they sift the flour, so they'll stone grind it, right? And then you have whole grain, which is integral. And then down from that, you have Manitoba. And then you have doppio uno and doppio zero, or doppio uno, or uno, zero, y doppio zero. And so that's like the way that they sift it. So the more that it's sifted, makes it so it's a softer flour and it's easier to work with, right? And what they've done with that is it's perfect for pizza and pasta because it's not elasticity, it's extensibility. So you want the flour and the dough to be extensible, not elastic. So elastic means that it when you stretch it, it comes back, right? And the other word, extensible, is where it stretches and stays stretched, right? And so that's what you're looking for, and you can only really get that with really soft flours. So if you were trying to mimic this, you would probably do like an all-purpose cut with a cake flour or a pastry flour, and you'd probably be able to come close to it. But it just makes sense to try and find the 00 flour. They sell it here at Giggy's. They also sell it at Caputo's. They sell it at a few other Italian import shops if you don't live here in town. And so it's really easy. So what I'm going to do... Go ahead.
So it's more similar to pastry or cake flour?
It's similar in the way that it's softer. So it makes a softer thing. So what you're not looking to necessarily develop gluten. You're looking to create like a soft elastic thing. And so gluten will be developed, but it's more with time with this type of flour than it is with kneading. So you don't need to knead this, which is very convenient. Okay. So I'm just adding the yeast in right here and just giving it like kind of a thing. And so the way that they'll traditionally make this is more the same way that you would make like, I don't know, how you would add baking soda to it first if you were making this as like a short crust. And so they would incorporate all of that into the flour first, and then you would incorporate the salt, which this is exactly 25 grams, don't worry. And then you'd incorporate the water. So I always encourage in my classes that if traditionally you would add your yeast to the water and let it bloom first because that's the kind of yeast that you have and that's what you've always done in your life. Like, don't change that. If you truly believe that that's going to make better pizza or bread, like bloom your yeast ahead of time. I don't want to tell you how to do it because I think that hope sometimes with these is a bigger factor than grams, okay? So if you have hope and love that it's going to, and faith that your dough is going to work out, that's worth more than how many grams you
In your
have.
recipe, not being too picky, but it says everything but the salt, and now you've added the salt before the water, so you like to put it in.
So this recipe, I believe, has sourdough in it. So that's why I wait for the sourdough, because I don't want salt to come in contact with the sourdough. You can modify that recipe by using just 1 extra gram of yeast and omitting the sourdough crust, or the sourdough starter, and that's what I've done here. So since we didn't have any to add, this does have sourdough though. So the bread that you'll see at the end, that one actually does have sourdough starter in it.
Can you repeat that? So if we're not using sourdough?
If you're not using sourdough, you just need 1 extra gram.
Yeah, there's a note right here on the paper.
Oh,
Right at the bottom.
So what if you're using like your own sourdough starter?
Yep. If you have your own sourdough start, then the recipe in there I think calls for 100 or 200 grams.
Right.
100 grams. So you would just use your sourdough starter in the place of that. Now, if you have a very active sourdough starter, you could even omit the yeast if you really wanted to, which I would highly suggest. It makes a delicious crust and it's fantastic. It does take a little bit of modifications, just leaving it more time, just to kind of see those signs of what sourdough does, right? But this one, because Neapolitan crust is traditionally fermented for about 72 hours, and you get that long fermentation, that's why you're only adding a little bit of yeast. So we're kind of cheating that and adding sourdough starter and yeast to be able to get the flavor of the sourdough starter, and you're getting the pull from the yeast. And in the process, you're just cutting it down a little bit of time, and you're adding the flavor of your crust, of your sourdough. Correct?
I've seen those little packets of instant sourdough starter, and I've never used them, but I'm a really bad sourdough mommy. And it just, consumes my life, and I'm a child abuser in that sense of the word. So I just can't control my sourdough. So Have you used those little packets?
I have, and
Are
honestly,
they a one-time use, or what are they?
nope. So you can keep using them. You start it, and as long as you feed them, they'll stay alive. So that's how Europe makes their sourdough. So for some reason in America, we've got this like thing of the older your sourdough starter, the better flavor, right? That comes from San Francisco style sourdough. If you ever tasted it, it's delicious. But there's also San Francisco sourdough makers that don't do it with old yeast, and it tastes better, in my opinion. So in Europe, they do not do like, this is my grandma's recipe from 1837 that we've continued to do. They don't. Every 2 or 3 weeks, they throw it away and they start over with one of those. Because
That's more my wild child life with sourdough, because it's long.
Yep. And another way that you can kind of cheat that system is by making a Poolish. You ever heard of a Poolish before? So a Poolish would be where you add maybe 1 gram of yeast and then flour and water and leave that on your table like overnight at room temperature, and you'll see that it'll rise, it'll fall, and that'll get you that sourdough flavor without needing it. So, because basically what's in that sourdough, dried sourdough thing is a controlled yeast that's been bred a certain way to make bread, right? So the yeast that you have in your fridge normally, that's made to make beer. It's not specific to bread. So they've bred it for 100, 200, 300 years to make beer, so it's not made for bread. And so what they did with that sourdough culture, that dried one, is just bred the yeast that's made for bread. So in all technicalities, that's just as much commercial yeast as anything else.
Okay, thank you.
Yep,
So what was
it'll
the
work.
measurements, that 1 gram of yeast to?
Yep, just to add if you're not using your sourdough starter.
No, yeah, but you said you could
Oh,
get,
for the Poolish. Yeah. 1 gram of yeast, and you could do like 50 grams of flour, 50 grams of water, and you would then have a starter culture. You
Okay.
continue to feed that just like you would a sourdough culture, and it'll continue to breed that yeast that you need for it.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. So what I'm doing is just mixing until you don't see flour, like dry flour. You don't really need to knead this as much as you're just trying to incorporate and hydrate all that flour. Go ahead.
So does it not matter that your sourdough starter is made with different flour? That's not gonna mess with the people?
No, it's not. Now, so this is a big thing that I always teach in my classes too, that sourdough starter and a levain that you use to rise your bread should always be different, okay? So if you have a starter that you're maintaining all the time, that's fantastic, but then you should then feed it, right? The amount that you need it for your recipe. So if you need 200 grams of starter for your recipe, 100 grams of the flour that you're going to use in the recipe, and 100 grams of water. And then that's your levain, right? Then you're gonna feed your starter whatever it's getting fed on a regular basis. So if you like the organic bread flour from, what is it? Arthur's, the King Arthur's bread, bread flour. That's the one that you always fed it with. You should continue to feed that starter with that all the time. But if you're going to make bread, like a whole wheat sourdough, the next day, you should make a levain separate with that new flour.
Equal parts water, equal parts starter, equal parts flour?
Yep.
So if I'm doing that with the flour that I use for the levain, be the 00?
Yeah, so I would use 00 for this to feed it the day before that I'm going to use it.
And then
Now-
use that for the...
Exactly. And then your starter would stay the same and get fed like it normally would. The nice thing about this dough is that because you're not using it to rise the dough, you don't need to go through that much work with it. It's already using yeast, right? So this is also a good recipe that you can use for discard. So if you're one of those people that hates the idea of discard because you think it's so wasteful and the dumbest thing ever, because I thought that for a long time, right? Then you can actually save save your discard and use that in the place of this in this recipe, which I think is very convenient because a lot of people, you end up throwing so much flour and water away, right? Which in hindsight, it's not that much, but at the same time, it's not good to be wasteful. And you can actually save that in your fridge, for up to a couple of weeks if you're doing it on a daily basis and you're putting like 50 grams and discarding it every day. Put it into a container in the fridge and just keep it covered. And you can use it in the place of buttermilk in a lot of your recipes, which is nice. So if you're doing buttermilk biscuits, just use sourdough discard instead of the butter, the same amount, or instead of buttermilk, and the same amount of lake volume, and you will have a great product, which is kind of fun.
So my starter is, I feel like it tends to be runny. So if I do the levain, I feel like that helps.
Yeah.
But in the case that, because it is runnier, I'm okay to add.
Are you measuring your sourdough, or are you just doing it by eyeball? When you feed it.
when I feed it, I measure it because that's the person that gave it to me said to do that. So I'll do like, I'll feed it with half cup water, half cup flour.
Gotcha.
But then when I do a levain, I'll measure it by weight.
Gotcha. Yeah, and so if it is a little liquidy, you might have to adjust the recipe a little bit. But in all honesty,
I just
this
add more
is
flour till I get
this
that
is
consistency
yeah, this
and
is
it-
forgiving enough. So I've played with this dough a lot, taking it from 50% hydration all the way up to 72% hydration, and that's about the max you can do without it kind of falling apart as you're making it. So as long as you're staying within those realms, so it's hard to kind of tell. But if you measure the next time when you feed it, and you're like, oh, this cup and this cup is what I usually do. Weigh that out and kind of see what percentage of hydration your starter is. And actually, it's very healthy for a starter to have too much water. So if you have an 80, 100, 200% hydration, that's totally fine. I traditionally go 100% hydration, so 50-50. So I do 50 grams to 50 grams. That's how I feed mine every single day. And then, I throw away everything but what is left in the container, and then add 50 grams, 50 grams. And that's how I continue to feed it every day. And so that's what its normal feeding is. That's how much it always gets. That's what it's used to. And that's what it keeps in the same place. So I always say when you're trying to make sourdough bread, if you're consistent, you'll always have great bread, okay? So if you are always feeding at the same time, always feeding with the same flavor, or same flour, always feeding, with the same type of water, at the same temperature, you'll always be successful with sourdough. The second that you go away from that, you're like, oh, it was 2 days, and I left it kind of like hanging out for a little while, and then it didn't make sourdough, you know why, right? But if you're consistent with it and honest with yourself about it, because that's the other thing, is being honest, right? You're like, I fed it, it's fine. I can go one more day, it's cool, right? But I would also encourage, if you're not making at least sourdough twice a week, you should keep it in the fridge and then have it, take it out of the fridge for 24 hours, feed it, so you have a 2-day cycle of how that kind of goes. So once I've got all the flour that's not, that none of it's dry anymore, I just kind of make it into a little ball, just to make it kind of taut. And then we're gonna set that aside and just cover with a bowl. So with the recipe, you can see that I think it says to leave it for 1 hour to kind of rest. Then you're going to portion that, and you're going to portion it into something like this. You need to get it covered. It's very important that whenever you're making pizza dough, especially if you want to let it ferment for a long amount of time, you need to have an airtight container. So something like this, there's actually pizza trays that are white, have a high, I don't know if you've ever seen it before. A lot of restaurants will have them. They have a high lip, and then they're airtight. And that's what you want to kind of incorporate. So you want to have it so there's almost steam that's released on the inside. And what that does, it makes it so a film doesn't get created on the outside. It actually makes bad pizza, okay? So you would take this, let it go for an hour, divide it, let it sit for another hour, and then put it in your fridge overnight. And that's the best way that I found to make pizza dough. You can adjust this recipe all that you want on time and change it. And I've used this exact recipe. We can even make pizza at the end of this class. It'll still make pizza and it's fantastic. But this will be a lot more flavorful, right? Because you're not looking for as much of usually you would want to create gluten, and that gluten, and then you have yeast that's inside there that kind of burps, right? And makes air bubbles inside the gluten, and almost makes a balloon, right? And you'll see that as you're letting it rise, you'll have to punch it down, then you'll have to divide it. You're never going to see that with this, ever. If you see bubbles going on in here, it's usually because you didn't make it nice enough, right? So you don't want to see that. You're wanting to see if there's any bubbles that get trapped in, they're only going to get released when they hit a really hot oven. Okay, that really hot oven is going to rise your crust, not long fermentation. Okay, the reason why we're letting it go cold overnight in the fridge is to develop that fermentation and to make sure that all the flour is hydrated, not necessarily to create more bubbles and rise. Okay, questions on that? You guys had great questions, so thank you. Okay,
I have a question.
go ahead.
Can you confirm, after you kneaded it, where did you let it sit for an hour first?
So just like this.
Okay.
So I just let it sit on my countertop with the bowl turned over, just a convenient thing. That way no air is really getting to it, and then it can just rest. After 20 minutes, you can shape it. It's not a big deal. You don't need to wait the whole hour, but you need 20 minutes for it to kind of relax. So if you've ever made sourdough before, as you're doing the turns, if you don't wait that 20 minutes, it's too hard to pull that turn, right? But if you wait 20 minutes, it's super easy and flexible. That's what we're looking for here, is for it to rest, everything to relax, become flexible, then we'll shape it and it'll be a lot easier, okay?
And then we did 1 hour in the tray.
And then 1 hour in the tray. And what that does is just, encourages that bacteria to kind of wake up a little bit just before you put it back to sleep in the fridge, okay? Great questions. Okay, so now you can kind of see how much thicker just by sitting at room temperature it's become. And that's what we're kind of looking for to be able to spread on the pizza. We just need those sprinkles eventually. She says it gets you done, right?
Other end.
That one doesn't work?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Oh, it's all for show.
Right.
Oh, this one. This one works.
Yeah.
So this is, like I say, it's very forgiving. So even if you're not seeing a ton of activity and your dough seems really droopy, when you're making it, you'll see that the hot oven temperature will make it rise regardless. I haven't had it fail yet. So if you do, call me up and let's talk about it, because I want to know exactly how to make it fail. So it's just one of those recipes that's super easy, it's forgiving, you don't have to, as long as you measure everything out properly, there shouldn't be any issues, okay? You're trying to use like cups and, that kind of thing. I've seen other people fail quite a bit with that. So don't try and get, if you don't want to scare spiral. It's one of those things that make good pizza, make good bread. It's really hard to do it with that steel, okay? All right. So this one I made last night at like 10:30 maybe. So it does have, so my discard had whole wheat flour in it. So you'll see some specks of whole wheat, which I think is kind of interesting and fun, but obviously not something that's needed, okay? So because we have it on this tray and we don't want to incorporate a lot of oil, and if you notice on the recipe, most pizza dough recipes you've ever looked at have oil in it, right? Or have sugar in it. This one does not contain either. Because when you're baking at such a high temperature, or mimicking the high temperature, those sugars will burn and create a crust on the outside so that it's like crispy, almost like New York style, and that's not what we're looking for. We want to have it like fluffy and beautiful, right? You guys ever had Neapolitan style pizza before? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a big difference with that and like your normal pizza, okay? So the big thing is you see how I kind of took that out? I kind of just, you can use like a dough scraper or something. This type of tool, like a palette knife that you get at Home Depot, is very, very nice. And if you look at a lot of Italian restaurants in Italy, they'll use a palette knife straight from Home Depot. So those kind of things that they use it until it's not nice anymore and they throw it away. And so you don't have to get like real complicated with what you're using, but if you have a bench scraper should work just fine taking it out, right? So we're gonna take it out of the tray onto some flour, which is very important. So you're gonna use way more flour for this part of the process than what you think. Let's see if we can move this here. There we go. So you're gonna get flour on both sides, but you wanna make sure that you maintain the top, and the bottom. The way I can kind of tell is that it's not smooth on the bottom, right? And the top is super smooth and kind of rounded on the edges. You wanna make sure you maintain that all the time. Because if you don't, it'll just release in a weird way into the oven as it steams off, okay? So you're gonna push the outside, which this right here is considered the cornicione, if you're interested. It's a fun Italian word that you can tell your friends. So we're just gonna create that, and I'm just kind of, you just wanna be extremely gentle. This is a forgiving dough, but it also, because it's so forgiving, it stretches so far sometimes that you just can't come back from it, okay? So I started with the outside, kind of pushing down the inside, and you kind of see the bubbles that are already created. Those aren't necessarily a good thing, so as I'm pushing them, I'm kind of popping them, okay? Then I'm gonna turn it over, and the main thing is, because you don't wanna create a bowl, you wanna create almost like a Saturn ring, and that'll puff a lot nicer. And so that's why I turn it over and do the exact same thing of creating that cornicione, so that the crust is like in the middle, not off to one side, because when you do that, it'll kind of dome up, okay? So once you have it on both sides, now you flip it back over so it's still the top is the top, the bottom is the bottom, right? And you want to have it big enough to where you can fit 2 fists on the inside of it. And that's the big thing, is just pushing it out with your hands until you get that point. And once you get that point, that's when you can use the back of your fist to kind of give like a stretch And you cannot do this with bread flour. So if you thought about doing this with bread flour, it won't stretch like this, okay? And that's the big thing that you want to, the big difference is that you want to create that, okay? So the big difference between my normal pizza recipes and this one is that if you throw this in the oven like this, it will puff and create almost like a pita bread, how a pita bread puffs. And so you don't want that. And so I'm just gonna kind of make some indents because we're gonna cook this naked and then put the Brigadeiro on top after that, okay?
It's up there, B2.
It is. Okay. So, and then if you were making Neapolitan pizza, you would build the pizza right here. You would not build it on the peel. And the reason for that is if it sticks to the peel and you go to throw it in, you don't know that until it's the worst time, right? But if it sticks on your surface right here, which you can use a lot less flour to build it, you can then, lift and put a little flour, you can fix it, right? And then once you have it, it's so easy to then put on top of here and to readjust, and then you can kind of see that it's always moving. So that's why with Neapolitan, they always do it on like a marble surface like this, and then slide it onto the peel, okay?
So when you put the toppings, if you are putting toppings on,
So,
after the peel or before the peel?
so you would put it before the peel. So you would put it while it's down, all of your toppings, your tomato sauce, your cheese, things like that would go on then, right? But the big thing with Neapolitan pizza is that you want to limit the amount of weight that you put on top, right? But before you cook it. When you take it out of the oven, you can put as many things on as you want, okay? So you'll see that a lot of places will put like prosciutto and arugula and Parmesan cheese, but that's all after the oven because those things after the oven then don't weigh down the ingredients so that it sticks on the peel. So that's why if you ever seen Neapolitan like margaritas, it almost looks like they just paint a little sauce on and they don't have enough cheese to cover, but if you try and dress it the same way you would like an American style pizza, it'll stick to the everything and it just won't work and it'll fall apart, okay? So you want to limit the ingredients you put on top before it goes in the oven. When it comes out, you can put more tomato sauce if you want, you can put so many things if you want, right? So we've switched this to broil now, so it should be real hot. And we might get like kind of a puff in the middle, like we're trying to avoid. It's not the end of the world because we're going to soak all that up with Brigadeiro at the end anyway, okay?
And that's like the top middle wrap?
Yeah, it's actually is close to the top you can kind of get. There's just one below from the very top. Because the closer you can get to that, the better, but also you don't want it to rise so much that it hits it either. So you want at least like a good 2.5 to 3 inches above of gap to kind of make it easier for you. But I try and get as close as I possibly can just because that broil is what's going to cook it nicely, not the oven temperature, right? You do want to preheat your stone to make sure the stone is hot, but if you turn your broil on early enough, that broil setting will heat up your stone as well. But I think we preheated for how long, Ever? Like maybe an hour ahead of time?
It was, an hour and a half.
Hour and a half, yeah. So as much time as you can give it, so it's just helpful. Because what you're trying to recreate is the heat that's inside an oven. The masonry mass gets all heated up before you're able to cook in it. So if you have a really thick stone, you want to make sure that's fully warmed up before you start. So you can kind of see, we're going to take it further, but I just wanted to show you kind of wasn't me. That we're looking for that crust to puff. We're going to get a little bit more color on it, but you can kind of see, where it's going.
So when we were in Brazil, my favorite pizza we had was a white chocolate and mozzarella pizza.
Yeah.
Would those toppings be too heavy for this type of dough?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. I think that if you were going to cook it in a lower oven, this recipe would work just fine to cook in a lower oven. You could add as many toppings as you wanted to. It's just because of the high heat of the oven that we're not going to add all those things at a time. But that is a good pizza. So that's the other thing that Brazilians do, which is crazy to every American, is to add sweet with mozzarella cheese. And it kind of creeped me out the first time I ate it, and it's so delicious. Because it's like the saltiness.
Honey with cheese, and we love it.
Yeah. It was just when I saw it the first time, I'm like, wait, this has mozzarella and chocolate? That's cool. Yeah. And so at Oak, we did a pizza where we put ricotta down. We put ricotta down, and then we did, white chocolate and coconut flakes. and that was one that we did. It was sweet that way. So
Do you use this pizza dough recipe in your uni oven?
yes, so this was actually what I developed it for, was for the uni. So I had already done it in the oven this way, and I was like, I have to get it to mimic more of that Neapolitan crust, you know, through a wood-fired oven, because that's what the uni demands, you know. And so that's why I kind of switched things up, and then I realized that this was even better for the oven than that was. So. So that's what we're kind of looking for. We can go further, but this is where I like it. So it hasn't quite got as dark on the bottom as we might want it, but really what's important is that top. And if you had mozzarella and tomato and olive oil, you would see it would puff and look maybe a little more glossy and delicious. We're doing something different today.
Do you want me to put it under the camera so you can see?
Oh, yeah. Nice. Grab this, thank you, sir.
So then we're gonna put that in the fridge, you can roll it with your hands, it will
Mhm.
be so, and that's how they make it into little balls.
That's how they make it into little balls, yep. And then sprinkles. And then you'll see in Brazil, they'll put cherries sometimes on this, they'll put strawberries on this, they'll drizzle it with white chocolate, but that is Brigadeiro pizza. Ryan, any questions?
So many.
And so, once again, if you didn't want to take the time to make Brigadeiro, a thing in my family is really popular is Nutella. Just throw Nutella straight on that way. You could bake it with a little bit of ricotta, and then do that. There's just so many different uses you can use for this base pizza dough. Don't think you're limited to any ingredients or things that you're able to put on. Just you want to limit the amounts that you put on, not how many or what's on there. If that makes sense. Right? Do you have like a little, maybe a cutting board? Yeah. We'll cut that one up.
You ended up making 6 balls of dough.
The recipe makes about 6. You can stretch it to make more.
Like a 12-inch.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. And you can stretch it to make, I made 8 with this, like 8 smaller ones. That totally work. Thanks, sir.
So the dough that you're working with right now, is it room temperature?
It's a little chilled, but yeah, it's mostly come to room temperature. I think you pull it from the refrigerator at like 9 o'clock, roughly, maybe like 8:45. So it's been there for a couple hours out of the fridge. Maybe a little bit more flour. Sorry. The cinnamon. There it's.
Oh, the sound is so great.
Yeah, so that's what's nice about this and cooking in that hot oven, is you get that kind of you get that crispy fluff, okay? We can have you come up and look at it. But that is like the crust that we're looking for, is that like aerated, fluffy, completely hydrated. That's that Neapolitan crust that you're looking for.
Beautiful.
Nice.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
On your sprinkles, are they just normal chocolate sprinkle jimmies?
Yeah, I think so.
No, they are 100% chocolate, so they're not
Oh.
waxy.
Oh, great, okay.
So they give you delicious flavor and a little crunch. Now you've got it in your crust.
I don't think it could be much better than that. And it's a crust that when you kind of figure out the tricks on how to work with it, it becomes a lot easier. Maybe that first time they use this crust, you just want to be real gentle with it, because you will see that it will like stretch really far. Maybe we'll play with that idea right now.
Do you have any tips for using it with uni? Because that cooks it way faster.
It does cook it faster, so you'll have to watch it. So my rule with the uni is 20 seconds. So throw it in and literally have a timer that says for 20 seconds, like it'll just pop off. If you don't, like you'll forget, and one side will be overcooked or whatever. And the uni says that it heats up in like 15 minutes or something like that. I've never seen it heat up in 15 minutes, so I just let it go for about 30. And then I use the Traeger competition blend in it instead of the uni pellets. So
Oh, you use the Traeger pellets?
yeah, I use the Traeger pellets.
Not wood chips?
Yeah.
Oh.
This is amazing. I was just like kilo down.
Yeah, so you can get this real.
You don't have a hard time with the inside of the dough cooking? You have, with this recipe is probably what I needed to do.
What's that?
On the uni, I had a hard time. The outside was beautiful, but the inside was still doughy.
Joey?
With this recipe.
I feel like I haven't had that happen with this recipe per se, but I've seen people that if your stone's not hot enough, that'll kind of happen. So you do want to heat up your stone oil. So you can see how extensible it is without tearing, and that's what you're gonna get in with 00 flour that you're not gonna get with bread flour or all-purpose. It's something that's just like more guaranteed. Wow.
It really looks like a stretched kilo dough.
Yeah, which I mean, I've never done that with it, but I always have been tempted to then like
Make a
brush
baklava
butter
pizza.
on it and then. Oh, yeah.
Amazing. This is my specialty.
Yeah. I don't think that will actually turn into anything, but.
Once you're cooking back-to-back pizzas, you're just leaving it on broil the whole time.
Leave it on broil the whole time. Yep. And if you have double ovens like this, it's always fun to do that. What I do want to stress is that you don't really want to make the next pizza until the first pizza is done. Because if you put toppings on it, it'll stick on your deck, and then it'll just rip to pieces. It'll just soak up all those ingredients. The thing is the second that you have ingredients on it, it needs to go right in the oven. If you wait at all, it'll stick. And we've seen that. I think we saw it in the class. You get in the pizza class. If you let it stick for even a second, it's like.
Yeah.
So. A little darker.
She has the bestest hands.
It's not that hot on the bottom. You just want to watch out for steam. The steam is what gets you, not it.
Make some room for you.
Nice.
this the crust you teach, or is it a different one?
No, this is the one I teach.
So you don't teach the one where all the teenagers pile on everything and throw it in the oven and all?
No, we do this Neapolitan crust, and we try to keep it real simple. We've got crazy on the second class, got a little bit crazier with ingredients. The first one we basically just made the margarita, and then we had a couple toppings afterwards that you play with, and then there was one at Oakwood Fire Kitchen that kind of became famous, which was the elote pizza, and we made the elote pizza. It's pretty tasty.
So good.
So here's another way to kind of do this. We're actually going to encourage that puff. So we can stuff it.
What was on the elote pizza?
Elote was, it was heavy cream, corn, and then you bake it, and then when it pulls out, we did Parmesan, mayonnaise, and lime chili, like seasoning.
Oh, weird.
Some cilantro. Mayonnaise on pizza. But we have some mayonnaise haters the last time we did that as a class, and everyone still loved it, so it's worth your time. I love mayonnaise.
I think mayonnaise is anything by itself, but.
I think it's one of those things where if you're
Sweet
open.
corn, right?
Yeah, it's just like sweet corn. Sweet corn has mayonnaise on the outside of it, and that was what kind of inspired us. But we use like Japanese Kewpie mayonnaise, which is like has a different consistency, which I think is more delicious, and it already comes in a convenient squeeze bottle for the restaurant. So thought I'd use it. So what I did here is instead of smashing down the middle, I kind of made it all one size, and so the idea is to create like the dome itself. And we're going to cut that open and then fill it and then cut it the same way. So it's really a sandwich.
Middle Eastern.
Yeah, exactly. In Italy, they actually have them as well. They're called piadinas, where they'll let it puff, they'll cut it open, and they'll fill it with, Coca-Cola and prosciutto and arugula and cheese. Put it back and then cut it in half, and that becomes like a sandwich.
Oh, that sounds wonderful.
Yeah. In the warm bread, where it just like slightly melts everything together, it's fantastic. See, all you can see from there. That's what we're looking for, is that like puff.
Whoa. It really does look like a pita puff.
Yeah, so at Oak, we used to do that, and we served it with the baked goat cheese and tomato, and you kind of like ripped it apart like a pita and dipped it through. So that was one of the things that we did. But I found out you can stuff it, you can put things on top of it. So we would just do this, pull out of the oven, it got olive oil, Parmesan, and black pepper.
You're making me very hungry.
Well, luckily for you guys, looks like there's enough for everyone to have. So you get to try it.
So my husband, my boss is Brazilian, and he, my work husband, did a fish, and I'm not a salmon lover. I mean, I'll eat it, but I'm not a lover. And he put that sweet condensed milk or something on it, and it was like the most delicious thing I'd ever put on there.
Trying to remember the name of the dish.
Yeah, because he's like, he couldn't remember the recipe, he can't give it to me, it was in Brazilian, and I'm like,
I'm gonna remember in a second. So it's basically because of the like northern Brazil and part of Sao Paulo has a ton of Lebanese immigrants, right? And so they had a lot of that. It's almost like a curry looking thing.
yeah, it's just so good.
Usually it gets in a sauce, and it'll be a fish, sometimes shrimp, and they'll use coconut milk, and they'll use chilies, and they'll use this oil that's made from a palm thing called oil de dende. It's really hard to make it authentically, but we fake it all the time at my house with like tomato paste and a bunch of different spices like smoked paprika and a little bit of oregano, and then coconut milk, and then that's going through a boil. You kind of thicken it maybe with like a slurry, and then you add your seafood to it and almost like steam it in that, and it's amazing. It's amazing.
It was good. I mean, when he said sweet condensed milk, I was like, what? On your fish?
Yeah, they do some crazy stuff. I was gonna remember this camera up top so you guys can get a better view. There we go. So just kind of cut these sides open. Scissors works really nicely in this too.
So you actually take the lid off. I would have cut half a pocket and tried to shove stuff in if you did that.
And this kind of just exposes that to that like really soft part of the bread, and doesn't ruin your crispy crust.
Your what?
Oh, you didn't see this one. Oops.
That's amazing.
So it's like a feeding. So this
That's
in
what I'm taking to lunch.
you
Like,
should. So this in Italy is really common. They'll do ricotta, and they'll do Nutella. They'll put chocolate. They'll put coconut shavings. They'll do all kinds of stuff for desserts at pizza restaurants. They'll do that a lot.
Where did you serve mission?
Brazil, Londrina.
Me too.
You did too?
I did.
Londrina mission?
Yep.
Oh wow, that's awesome. What year?
96 to 98.
96, 98. I was 2005 to 2007.
So it was Mozzarella when I was there.
Oh, you were Monday? Oh yeah.
But it was the same.
Londrina,
mission.
yeah, the mission home with the Londrina. Now it's not. Now I think they've split it. And it's Campo Grande and
Oh.
Campo Grande is one mission home, and then the other one's at in Maringá. I think it's very good. That's funny.
Yeah.
Small world.
So if you go through a lot of 00 flour, I found Central Milling and Logan to be a great supplier.
So
They have
they
a
actually
great selection of
they
flour.
sell it here.
Okay.
Essentially,
So we
yeah.
don't have to go to Logan.
You don't have
So-
to go all the way to Logan if you don't want to.
As you guys walk back into the store, there's like a big Christmas table. I have the sprinkles and the cocoa powder and the flour all just right there, so you don't have to find it in the store.
Yeah, but with that said, so I had a little cafe up at the University of Utah, and I would buy a pallet at a time. I would go and grab a pallet.
When I go up there, I come back with 50-pound bags.
Yeah. So I have this tub in my storage room. It's like a white trash can that's just for 50-pound bags of flour. And so I end up doing that a lot. I'm out though, so it's time to re-up.
What was the name of that place in Logan?
Central Mills.
Central Mills.
So the cool thing about Central Mills is it was originally owned, so it was bought by the Giusto family, which were the most famous flour mill in San Francisco, or outside of San Francisco. And they were buying all of their grain from northern Utah and Idaho and Montana. And so they had to figure out a way that they could get closer to the source so they could have fresher flour. And so they bought Central Mills in Tremont, Utah, and then they sold Giusto's, which is still a super famous mill. But the Giusto family actually owns Central Mills in Tremont now, and it gets shipped everywhere. I've seen it in, bakeries in France that use Central Mill flour. California use Central Mill flour. There's a couple famous. So if you ever just try and look up like the hashtag like sourdough or sourdough, you'll end up finding that almost everyone uses Central Mill flour, especially like the baker's blend and their bread flour. It's world renowned. So it's so great to have such an amazing mill right here in our backyard.
I did.
Yeah. And
So
so
Logan, get flour and cheese.
there you go. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, you gotta go on the. I mean, I feel like they had a market in Logan, but I think it shut down. So you gotta go all the way to Tremont now, which it's not that far of a drive.
Cheese and root beer milk.
Is it Gosler's?
So just one
Yeah.
of those.
Yeah.
We don't go very often, but whenever I go, people go,
Yeah.
I need root beer milk. I mean, to me, it's anything that shows staples. The milk coming out of the can.
I can't stand it.
I don't
But I
like
know
milk,
that
so.
she would, but I like that.
Yeah.